James Richard Russell III. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Hey, audio just kicked in. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing great. How's your day going?
Oh man, it's been hectic.
Can I tell you something? I have not lived in Arkansas for almost 30 years. It's been a long time, but I love talking to Arkansans and that drawl and that accent, man. It just makes me feel at home. It's crazy.
Well, good. I've been in Arkansas full time since about '97. So before that, I've got some Louisiana and some Texas thrown in for good measure. So,
oh my God, that's quite a mix. What part of Louisiana did you live in?
Oh man, Shreveport mostly, but in New Orleans for a year too. So,
okay, so let me ask you: Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas. Who has the best barbecue? You know you're running for office in Arkansas. You better make the right choice.
Yeah, I know. Actually, I will have to say no. Legitimately, it reminded me McLard's down in Hot Springs. So yeah.
Okay.
I will give it to them. McLard's down in Hot Springs does have to be my favorite overall.
Hot Springs for the win. I love it. All right.
Yep.
Well, let's go ahead. I'll do my quick little intro here, and then we'll introduce you and we'll get started. You ready?
Yeah, man. Go for it.
All right, guys, I want to thank you so much for joining me for today's Observe and Report podcast here on the Security Guard channel. Today, we are super excited to welcome James Richard Russell III.
Hi, my name is James R. Russell III. You can just call me Russ, and I'm running for governor of Arkansas in 2022. I want us to work together to build a better state for everyone. I want to do that using the 4E platform. Education. As governor, it would be my priority to work with our industries and educational institutions to build programs designed specifically to give our citizens the tools they need to lead Arkansas into the future. The economy. How much economic freedom do you have? Arkansas has among the highest rates of poverty in the entire country, and it has only gotten worse in the wake of COVID-19. We must fix the gender wage gap, ensure bargaining power for employees, more protection for renters, and protecting citizens from predatory business practices. Equity. Our nation was founded on the principle that all people were created equal. We must ensure the rights, opportunities, and protections of all people, regardless of ethnicity, gender identity, or any other factor. Environment. We call ourselves the natural state. I think it's about time we act like it. Arkansas is rich with natural resources and biodiversity. We must take steps to protect these gifts and ensure they are protected for future generations, and bring our industries in line with the best practices by scientific and data-driven research. And the 4 E's are not separate issues. Better education leads to better understanding. Better understanding leads to more equity and more economic freedom. And sustainable agriculture practices lead to a better economy and a sustainable environment for future generations. With me, you'll get straight answers. It's time for no more BS in Arkansas. I'll see you on the campaign trail. I hope I can earn your vote. And remember, a vote for Russ
is a vote for us.
He is the progressive candidate for governor of Arkansas. I see you're wearing that purple shirt, which I want you to know I did my homework. That's the color you're using on all your campaign material.
That's right. Absolutely.
What's up with the color purple?
Well, I just like it. I've always loved the color anyway.
There you go.
The other one is, we're always talking about red states, blue states, all this stuff, making it out to be this false binary. We're complex. We're a mix of people. You actually look at a map based on voting instead of just who won, and we're all purple. Every single bit of it, all the way across. Got splashes of green and yellow from Green Party, Libertarian, whatever else, but it doesn't matter. It's not this binary that they keep trying to get us to play into. So,
James, don't you feel like a lot of people, especially like I know coming from Arkansas, and now you got my drawl coming out. I feel at home with you, but a lot of people in Arkansas, and I think across the country, people have some things that they feel very passionately conservative about, and some things they feel very passionately liberal about. Do you feel that post 2020 that people are going to feel a little bit more comfortable being in that purple space where they can kind of vote more for the person as opposed to vote for the party? Or do you think that we're going to continue to be more polarized?
What I'm thinking, based on what I saw, especially if we look at the voter turnout in Arkansas in particular, because that's where my research has been, is looking at our numbers. Of course, in the wake of since even 2016, we've seen a much more polarized voting base. That got even more so in 2020. Whichever side they were on, they just dug in deeper into the trenches. What we saw here in Arkansas was lower voter turnout. And what I think has happened is that massive push of pick one side or another has turned so many people off that they've just gone, forget it, whatever, and they don't feel empowered. They don't feel like they've got a say. So for me, it's a matter of those are the purple people. They're the ones where it get off the bench and get in there and make your voice heard. The ones that are trying to have their rights suppressed, the ones that have been disenfranchised, the ones that have just given into apathy. When they give into the narrative, when you constantly hear we're a red state, we're a Republican state, when you grow up hearing that, like you had mentioned in our conversations online, when you grow up hearing that in the post-Clinton era, that we're a red state, well, you've now got full generations of people that just grew up hearing that as fact. There's never an opinion about it. They're just told it's that way. So there's no reason for them to think to try to fight against it. So that's what I'm hoping to do with this, is to bring people back to the table of going, no, we're humans. We're not supposed to fit in these neat little boxes. We are supposed to have complex ideas, and you can be conservative on one thing, liberal on something else, way out there. But we've got to be able to have those discussions. We've got to have the voices be heard. We've got to be represented at the table. So that's my hope, is to actually get the disenfranchised back involved in the process.
But how do you reach people that are so tightly dug into their corners? Right now, we seem to be in a position where we're in a politics era, or a political era, where it's more about the cult of personality, and the cult of personality on either side. So on the left, you've got your AOCs and your Ilhan Omars. On the right, clearly you have your Donald Trump, your Ted Cruz, your DeSantis. So how do you feel it's going to be possible for you in this climate to galvanize people more towards the middle? That seems to be something that I think Clinton was able to do. I was a lot younger back in the time of his campaign, and I actually got a chance to meet him in '98. I served in the Air Force, and I was involved in a program where, I shouldn't say a program, but a mission where we were involved in a skirmish in Kosovo. And for the first time, we used the B-2 stealth bomber. And after bringing that weapon system online, I was one of 9 people that were able to sit down with the president and have a little meeting with him afterwards. So, he was able to galvanize people from both the left and the right for the most part in that first election. How do you feel that you're going to be able to do that in such a very venomous political climate? I know you say you're going to reach out to that disenfranchised voter, but if you're leaning left on some of the more critical issues like CRT or defunding the police or immigration or things like that, that might be very hard to reach that person that's on that far right. And then if you're not being liberal enough on some of those things, you might push away some people on the far left. So what is your strategy to actually galvanize those disenfranchised voters?
The one biggest thing that I found is the easiest way to galvanize them is talking to them the same way you and I are. If we're looking at everything if we're looking at the macrocosm, if we're looking at it, society as a whole, like we're talking about as the electorate, as a big entity, then it does get harder. Because you've got the people that are just listening to the talking heads on whichever, outlet of their choice. I'm not calling fake news. We've got some seriously biased sources in different ways. But when you've got people that do get entrenched that way in the grand scheme, it does get difficult. But getting in there one-on-one, that's one of the reasons why, like, my campaign has been grassroots, not worried about massive advertising, fundraising, all that. I'm not worried about trying to raise a bunch of money to throw ads. I'm worried about getting enough gas in my tank to get myself to somebody's, wherever we can meet up, pizza place, go have lunch, whatever, let's talk. Because no matter who, I don't care where they are on the spectrum, if we sit down and we're talking like you and I are here, we find common ground. We find out that there are things that we can actually come to terms on. And even within my own family, I've got family members who all over the religious spectrum anyway, but one in particular, devout Catholic. literally just cannot get behind my campaign fully because they feel like, same-sex marriage is a big issue for them. I'm like, that's fine. But what you have to realize is that's an issue within your religion. That doesn't give you the right to deny rights to anyone else within society. You can have that within your church. You can make that decision because that is a religious principle, but you can't make it a state sanctioned thing. And then we can have those kind of conversations where you can break it down and explain that you do not get to strip someone else's rights just because it matches this one thing on yours.
Are you finding that people are being receptive? Like, I think that you really articulated that very well. And especially if you're talking about people that are believing counter to that, but you're having that one-on-one conversation, you did a great job of articulating that. How are those people being receptive to that kind of a dialogue?
Honest to God, I have not had a bad reception to it yet. Every single person I have talked to, we've come away, I don't care how far we disagreed on issues at the beginning, we have walked away being able to shake hands and go, all right, yeah, solid. I get where you're coming from. Let's build on this. Let's talk some more. Let's work on this. And both of us be able to understand where we're coming from better. So on every level, it has always been a positive outcome. And that's what gives me hope. It just makes it a much harder task. And it's why I like doing interviews like this and talking to people one-on-one, where like when this video goes out, people can hear that it's not this entrenched demonizing kind of mindset. It is very much a, man, I'm out there in the open. You got a question about something? Come on, let's talk. We're not here to fight about something. We're here to find mutual solutions. We're here to mutually benefit each other. That's what we got to be working towards.
Well, I want to pose a couple of questions to you from my personal experience. So clearly, this is the Security Guard channel. I am not law enforcement. I am not a first responder. We call security the thin, vague line because we're not quite sure where we fall in. But what I do know is that being here in Portland, it puts me in a very precarious situation, and I'd like to explain. We currently have a law enforcement department, our Portland Police Bureau, because of the contentious relationship with the public in the city here in Portland, the police department is not able to do any quote unquote moonlighting, right? So in the past, if you think of any city in the country, your municipal police officers generally pull their shift. And when their shift is over, they're able to do armed security for retail establishments. They're able to do armed security for, nightclubs, bars, anywhere that needs security. So here in the Portland area.
Yeah, I've worked with them before.
You probably see that quite a bit. So here in the Portland area, due to the high level of activism and due to the litigious nature of things here in the area, the Bureau does not do any moonlighting, which that opened up a huge gap and a need for people to do armed security. So like anywhere else, we have lots of armed security companies. And one of the companies that I worked for was established by former law enforcement officers, and they hire anyone with former law enforcement experience. So if you were military police, if you were in corrections, sheriff's department, anything like that. And we have filled the gap in those places that were specifically contracted out by the police department officers when they were on their own time. Okay. So these are retail establishments and different things like that. Since the George Floyd situation and the defund movement, it's gotten even more stressful for security guards because now we have a situation here where our police department is at direct odds with our district attorney. Our district attorney came out very, very early on in the protest movement last year, sided with quote unquote Antifa, and said that he would not prosecute for misdemeanor crimes, would not prosecute for anything of vandalism, anything that happened during the riot. And I'm paraphrasing here. So with that, the police department kind of pulled back even more. So here we are now in July. Response times to 911 calls are anywhere in the upwards of 30 to an hour, 30 minutes to an hour, if they respond at all. Anything that's a theft that's under $1,000 will not be prosecuted. Anything that's not a felony probably will not be an arrestable offense, and they will not place that person in jail. We've seen the decriminalization of heroin and methamphetamine in this area, and homelessness is rampant. I think the number now is around 40,000 homeless people here in an area that has a population of 600,000. So my question to you is this. I am seeing the direct result of what I would say is lawlessness and a progressive push to almost be accepting of anything, so far so that we are allowing people to just live on the streets in utter filth and people to openly do drugs. With this push to defund the police, how do you see your campaign or your position as governor? How would you address the accountability issue, but also the opposite of what happens if we take police completely out of the picture?
Well, one, it would never be a question to take police out of the picture. Mine, rather than defund, mine has been more a focus of demilitarize. It's how we're utilizing the police force, because you're right. You're 100% in the fact that it has become everywhere just way too contentious of a relationship between law enforcement and civilians. It's become just overtly hostile in narrative and in presentation, and we've got to figure out a way to de-escalate that, just point blank. And for protection on both sides.
Absolutely.
That's the thing is, you hear the slogans, all cops are bad, things like that. And it's like, well, that's a real snappy hashtag and all that kind of stuff, but it doesn't break down the fact that I'm not saying that each individual police officer is a terrible human being. I'm saying there are systemic issues with policing itself and how it is handled need to be addressed. That's too long to tweet, so it doesn't catch on. So it doesn't look good on the shirt. So it
can't hashtag that.
Right. So it's one of those where it's like, do I get where they're coming from? Absolutely. Do I agree with the messaging? Only with a little bit of interpretation and actual nuance to it. And I do, if you don't mind for a second, it's kind of interesting because you're talking about the situation in Portland, and one of my best friends that I've known since we were literally in kindergarten. We've known each other coming up on 45 years. He lives just up there in Beaverton. Okay. And we've joked forever that we need to switch places because he's more on the conservative side and all that. We just landed in the wrong spot. But so I knew a lot about what was going on before you reached out. And so I was glad to hear more input from you on it.
Yeah, of course.
But it's fascinating because it's almost such a 180, because what we had here in Arkansas anyway was like when we had the Black Lives Matter movement and we had the protesters out on the streets and everything, we had the police being sent out along with the National Guard and everything, and sent to advance on the protesters, regardless of whether they were peaceful or not trying to remove bad actors, nothing. And we had our leaders and our elected officials calling for more violence against them. They wanted harsher tactics. So it was just such a different thing. And you describing the situation to me up there in the Portland area, I can hear and understand how some of that stuff probably got pushed through. Like when you're saying that they weren't allowing the officers to do the moonlighting, I can hear how that probably got pushed through legislation because, well, that opens up more commerce because that's a niche that now can be filled by something else. You're not putting them at extra risk. You're not overtaxing your police officers, so they're actually fresh when they're on duty. I can see how that argument got there. But if you're also undermining their ability to actually enforce anything, then you've got private security forces, like that aren't on public oversight, that don't have any kind of anything to any kind of responsibility back to the public. They're on their own kind of thing, and that becomes a problem. And then hearing that the district attorney is you can decriminalize stuff, but it sounds like they made a lot of well-intended decisions without considering how they were actually going to intersect.
Well, James, I think that if I can interject here for a second, I think that my biggest concern with the progressive movement is that, to me, there seems to be there's no boundary to it. And I think that if you're a moderate or you're a conservative, that's the fear. It's like, where does something stop? And what I see here in Portland is that we have leaned so far left that we've fallen completely over. And it's an idea that Well, if I say that something is wrong, then that in turn means that I am opening a door for them to be intolerant of whatever my thing is. For instance, me being a black man, right? If I'm a black man, I can't disagree with the LGBTQ agenda, which I'm not saying that I do. I'm just making an example here. As a black man, I can't disagree with the LGBTQ agenda because that in turn opens the door for someone to scrutinize whatever it is that me as a black man is complaining about. And then vice versa on the LGBTQ side, they can't be concerned about rampant drug usage or homelessness because that's a social issue that could then also say, well, in turn, we can go against whatever it is that you're trying to push through. So I feel like here in Portland, we've gotten so progressive all the way around that there's just no boundary. There's no effort to hold anyone accountable for anything. And so you see what we've seen over the past year where downtown destruction is completely okay and open drug usage is completely okay and rampant homelessness is completely okay. So you as a quote unquote progressive candidate, how do you ensure that the people that are on the far right don't feel that you subscribe to that far left of an ideal?
Well, again, because going back to the idea of the police funding, especially here, it's not a matter of defunding. It's how are you handling policy? For instance, there in Portland, decriminalization of drugs and everything like that. Okay, that's fine. Did you match that with a commensurate increase in spending for substance abuse programs and training and putting the resources back in to help the people, because you're still dealing with someone trying to medicate for an existential crisis.
Yeah.
So you've got to still have a boundary in place or a mechanism in place to serve that need. Now, one of the problems and one of the things I feel like is at the core of it that a lot of people I don't think have really talked about is when they talk about defund the police. Well, the problem is we've thrown every responsibility in the world at the police forever. We've just said, well, what are we going to do about this? We'll make it illegal and make it their problem. Let the courts figure it out. Let this figure it out. You can't constantly just throw more responsibility at any one organization and then not have it in check and then undermine it like what you've got with the DA and stuff. You can't do that. So you have to have that balance. So to the conservatives, to the centrists, to anything, I would say, no, you don't want complete anarchy. You don't want destruction of property. You want cooperative effort between the citizens and your law enforcement. Again, because Portland, I saw with the destruction and everything like that. Luckily, we didn't suffer as badly here in Arkansas. But that was one of the reasons I was so disheartened, is there are other ways to approach it. Again, with it being a closer example for me here. When I saw them form up a phalanx in advance on our protesters, I 100% agree that we need to protect private property. They are downtown. You do have bad actors in there. You need to do something. That doesn't mean you need to form up and use chemical weapons and rubber bullets. You can take that same manpower or, the same force and line the street with it to make sure that nobody's actually working alone, work with the crowd, help to remove bad actors from it so that property is being protected, the people are being protected, their First Amendment rights are still being in place, everything's functioning the way it should be. But we've got to have leaders that are willing to say, whoa, hang on a minute. We have the means to do this, but we have to be smart about how we're using it. We can't just want to constantly ramp things up, but we also can't just wash our hands of it.
Absolutely.
We've got to have leaders who are willing to step up and make a decision and be willing to be held accountable themselves to the outcome of that decision. They can't pass the buck. They can't blame somebody else. They have to say, no, we're doing this, and justify their reasons, deal with the results, look at the consequences, and then move to solve the next thing. And
I like that.
Yeah.
And you're talking about accountability, which is a great pivot into my last question and point for you is, what are your thoughts and what's your position on gun rights?
I am 100% in favor of them. I am pro Second Amendment. My one thing is, I will freely tell anybody, we own guns. We've got them here at the house. No big deal. You know as well as I do. Growing up in the South, it's just intrinsic to the culture. It's
Everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. You just kind of assume everyone is armed. It's just
Yeah.
there. But the one thing that I did witness over the past year is even during COVID, gun shows and stuff are going on. I've joked with other people that I am willing to bet that I attended more gun shows than any Republican candidate for any office in the past year. I'm willing to bet that. But in the process of that, I saw firsthand the gun show loophole from private sellers and things like that going on. So am I a proponent of gun ownership? 100%. Lawfully, well-regulated, and everything else. All these, when it gets blown out of proportion about, they're trying to put a registry together to come take our guns. They've threatened that forever. Clinton didn't come take them. Obama didn't come take them. Nobody has come taking them. The people profiting off that are the NRA, Remington, Smith & Wesson. We need to pay attention to who's actually profiting from the narrative. But when it comes to private sales and gun show ownership and ghost guns and things like that, I do think that we need to actually have some more measures in place to ensure that lawful gun owners are in possession. Much like we talked about with the decision to not allow the moonlighting from the police and that increasing and opening up another line of revenue for places. It's the same thing. Is a lot of gun dealers and stuff say, I don't want the responsibility of having that come through. Well, if a private gun owner has to put a sale through where you're running that background check and you're responsible for doing it, you can charge a nominal fee for it, and you can start hiring more people on. So it's actually an economic boost on top of ensuring that we've actually got the background checks run so that you don't have behind the scenes gun deals, and then you've got lawful gun ownership. And it makes it safer in general without infringing on anyone's rights in any way, shape, or form. So it's just common sense. It's making sure that that's going on. It's making sure that people that have guns have them secured so that you don't end up, you're on vacation or something, somebody breaks in, steals your guns, and now they're being used to commit a crime, things like that. That's not part of responsible gun ownership. And it comes back down to that. I'll harp on it till the end of time. It's that accountability. It's that responsibility. And that seems to be what the right wants to scream about all the time, is taking responsibility. I'm way over here on the left screaming for it. We got to be responsible for our decisions and actions. And that goes down to gun ownership too. Should you be able to own one? Absolutely. But you've got to be responsible about owning it and about how you transfer that.
James, I think that you are in a great position to fill a very needed gap in politics right now. This is my first time meeting you and talking to you face to face, but you seem like a very sensible person. You seem like a very well thought out, well articulate person. And I think that what we need, and this is just my personal opinion, I would vote for any candidate that is able to have this type of conversation, not invoke any sort of popular idols or any sort of negative politics, and just a sensible conversation on some of the topics and just kind of that face-to-face conversation. So I think that is so needed in politics right now. I don't know if you're going to have enough power to defeat someone with the might of Sarah Sanders and what she's bringing to this fight. But I do want to tell you this, just as an Arkansan, as a voter, and as a man, I absolutely love what you stand for. And I am so, so proud to have somebody who is bringing some civility and calmness back to politics. It is so needed. So whatever happens, please, please, please stay involved and do everything that you can to get more people into what you're doing and where you're coming from, because this country needs this. It really does. And I can't thank you enough for coming on today.
Oh, dude, I appreciate you having me on. And as I have said from the beginning, I know the David and Goliath scenario. I've had no illusions about that at all. But what we said from the beginning is, I don't care whether we win or lose. We're just going to keep getting louder about it. But we've got to be able to get loud without screaming at each other. That's the catch. So,
Outstanding.
Yeah.
James Richard Russell III, thank you so much for being on the Observe and Report podcast. The security guards, we support you, and best of luck to you, sir. Okay.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. I'd be happy to be back on anytime. Just holler.
Absolutely. Be great.
All right, man.